Have you ever imagined being thrown out of your own home by the very child you sacrificed everything to raise? Abeni, a single mother, spent her entire life nurturing her only son, Kwame, only to be cast aside in the pouring rain when he chose to marry a beautiful but manipulative woman. What most people don't realize is this: the ones you love the most are often the ones who hurt you the deepest, and sometimes you have to lose everything to finally see the truth. This story is based on real events, inspired by letters from a single mother in Ghana who built a food empire with nothing but her hands and heartbreak. Watch to the end and you'll witness how love can blind, how a mother's resilience can rebuild from ashes, and why a grown man dropped to his knees in tears right in the middle of a busy market. Kwame, once a wealthy entrepreneur, lost everything within 24 hours of marrying the wrong woman. But it was in a humble street food stall that he found the one thing money could never buy: forgiveness. Don't skip this story, especially if you're a parent, or if you've ever made a decision that cost you someone irreplaceable. 5 minutes might just change how you see everything before it's too late. Under the golden chandelier, the diamonds on her hand burned brighter than fire. Laughter swelled through the hall like a wave, polished glasses clinking against each other in perfect rhythm, every note sharpened by the orchestra playing in the corner. And there, at the center of it all, stood Kwame, tall, handsome, radiant, his smile carrying the certainty of a man who believed he had finally found joy. Beside him, Zuri glowed in white silk, her arm wrapped around his, a picture of triumph painted for every watching eye. The hall smelled of roses and expensive perfume, the kind that clung to the air and reminded Abeni of years when she couldn't even afford soap. Her son's laughter rang clear, but beneath the music, beneath the shallow chorus of blessings, her heart pounded with something else, an unease she could not name, a shadow trailing across the glittering stage. She sat among the guests, but her mind slipped backward, away from the chandeliers, away from the polished marble floors, into nights of dim lanterns and the bitter smell of medicine she could barely buy. She remembered the day she pressed her necklace, a chain of small golden beads, the last gift from her late mother, into the jeweler's palm so she could pay the doctor. She remembered pawning silence and dignity just to keep Kwame in school. All those sacrifices had taken shape in this moment, this hall, this celebration. Yet the necklace's absence felt heavier than any jewel on Zuri's hand. The orchestra's tune softened for a toast. Guests rose, glasses raised, their voices echoing through crystal and marble. Kwame lifted his glass with them, proud, steady. Abeni's lips barely touched hers, her eyes tracing the shine on Zuri's ring. And then, like a whisper not meant for the living, the sound cut through the air. A phone pressed against crimson lips, a voice almost too soft to catch. "Don't worry, he's nothing but my wallet." The word slid into Abeni's ear like a blade. For a moment she thought she had misheard, that the orchestra had twisted her senses, but the smirk at the corner of Zuri's mouth when she ended the call left no doubt. Abeni's fingers clenched. Her palm found the weight of the one thing she had never sold, never surrendered. The old necklace, its beads dull now, but still alive with every sacrifice. She pressed it so hard into her skin that the edges left marks, as if pain might anchor her in place. The applause surged again, oblivious. Abeni's heart thrashed like a bird against glass. She looked at her son, laughing, radiant, leaning into the woman who had already called him by another name: Wallet. She wanted to cry out, to grab him by the shoulders, but the hall was too bright, the walls too tall, the crowd too blind. Every word she might have spoken turned to stone in her throat. She studied Zuri with new eyes, watching every tilt of her chin, every glimmer in her gaze. There it was, the mask of devotion, polished and perfect. But Abeni had lived too long in shadows to be fooled. The truth had cracked through in a single careless whisper. All the lights in the hall only made the darkness sharper for her. The speeches continued, voices weaving together like threads of silk. Kwame turned to thank his guests, to thank his mother. His eyes searched for her, soft and grateful, as though every sacrifice she had made was visible in this one moment of pride. But when their eyes met, Abeni could not smile. The necklace in her fist pulsed like a heartbeat, reminding her of the cost of love and the danger of blindness. She forced herself to nod, to lift her glass, even as her hand trembled. Every sound blurred, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the music. Abeni's body was in the hall, but her spirit drifted somewhere else. Standing on the edge of a storm she could feel, but not yet see. She understood then that joy could be an illusion, that gold could burn brighter than truth, that her son's heart was in a stranger's hands. The hall swayed with light and shadow, and she could do nothing but sit, silent, unseen, clutching her necklace as if it were the only anchor left. When the last toast ended and the music swelled again, Abeni slid the necklace into her pocket. The beads pressed against the fabric like a secret locked away, but one that demanded to be spoken. Her eyes darkened, heavy with the weight of what she now carried. Around her, the celebration roared on, but she could feel the hollowness beneath every note. In that crowd of glitter and wine, she was the only one who knew the truth. And as the lights flared brighter, as the orchestra's song rose to the ceiling, her silence became a vow. She would not let this lie bury her son. She would find the moment, the courage, the words. Until then, the necklace slept in her pocket, a witness to love, to sacrifice, and now to betrayal. Her gaze fixed on Kwame's back, so proud, so blind. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, her eyes hardened, the way skies do before thunder. The hall glittered on, unaware that the night's brightest joy had already been cracked by a secret whispered too soon. And in the quiet of her heart, Abeni knew she carried a truth that would not stay buried. The storm had not yet broken, but the night was heavy with the taste of rain. Thunder rolled far away, muffled, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Abeni's knuckles rapped against the polished wood of her son's door, each knock swallowed by the silence of the house. Her hair clung to her temples, damp from the mist that had already begun to rise. The light from the hallway cut across her face, and for the first time in years, she felt small in her own son's home. Inside, Kwame's voice came sharp, irritated, as though he already knew what she wanted to say. The door creaked open, revealing him with his shirt half unbuttoned, his face flushed with the heat of wine and pride. The golden glow from the lamp behind him framed his shoulders, a portrait of a man who thought he had everything. Yet in Abeni's eyes, he still looked like the boy she once stayed awake for, sewing by candlelight so he could wear a clean shirt to school. She whispered his name, soft as a plea. He stiffened, the tension running through him like a drawn bow. "Not tonight, Mama. Please." The word Mama still carried weight, but already there was distance, like glass between them. She stepped forward, her fingers trembling as they clutched the necklace hidden in her pocket. Her eyes flicked to the table behind him. Papers scattered, documents with thick black lines of text, seals embossed in red. She recognized the language of contracts even from afar. One page caught the light, a draft of something binding, something legal. She felt her stomach twist. In the corner, the signature line lay empty, waiting like a trap. She lifted her eyes to her son. "Kwame, listen to me. You mustn't," but he cut her off, his voice rising like a blade. "I don't need this again. I love her. That's all that matters. Do you hear me?" His hands trembled as he scooped up the papers, crumpling one with a sudden violence. He tore it down the middle, the sound ripping through the silence like thunder. The pieces fluttered to the floor. Love doesn't need contracts. Love doesn't need permission. The words struck her like stones. For a moment, she could not breathe. She had raised him on lessons of caution, of dignity, of patience, and now he threw them back at her, each syllable a rejection of her sacrifice. She opened her mouth, but he shouted again, louder, sharp enough to break her. "If you keep poisoning this with your doubts, then leave. Leave this house and don't come back." The air collapsed around her. She stepped back, her hand brushing against the doorframe to keep herself steady. Her throat burned, but no sound came. Only the rain outside answered, beginning to fall in heavy sheets against the windows. The house itself seemed to groan under the storm's weight. Kwame turned away, his shoulders rigid, his chest heaving. The door slammed with a finality that echoed through her bones. She stood alone in the hallway, her shadow stretched long by the flickering light. The house was no longer hers. The walls she had once filled with lullabies now pressed in like strangers. Slowly she turned, her feet carrying her down the stairs, step by step, the wood creaking beneath her weight. Each sound was swallowed by the storm. Outside, the rain drenched her instantly. It was not gentle. It came like 1,000 small hands pushing her down, soaking her shawl until it clung heavy against her body. The world blurred, streetlights glowing like halos through the downpour. Her sandals slipped on the cobblestones, yet she kept moving, driven not by direction but by the need to escape the echo of her son's voice. Her tears mixed with the rain until she could not tell one from the other. She walked through puddles that swallowed her ankles, through wind that whipped her hair across her face. The city seemed to vanish, its lights dimmed by the storm, its people locked behind doors that would not open for her. And still, her hand pressed against her pocket, feeling the necklace inside. Each bead was cold now, hard against her palm, a reminder of every night she had endured hunger so he would not. The weight of it was unbearable, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant, that she had given everything and still lost him. The rain tasted of salt. Thunder cracked overhead, startling a flock of birds from the rooftops. Their wings beat frantically against the night, their cries sharp against the roar of the storm. She lifted her face to the sky, letting the water sting her eyes, as though punishment might wash away the ache inside. For a moment she thought of turning back, of knocking once more, of begging him to listen. But the image of his face, twisted with anger, stopped her. The boy she had raised was gone. In his place stood a man blinded by love, too fragile to withstand truth. She could not break through, not tonight, maybe not ever. Her body trembled with cold, her lips chattering as she stumbled through the streets. Stray dogs darted between alleys, their fur plastered to their skin. A neon sign buzzed weakly, casting her shadow across the pavement. She followed it, not caring where it led, her heart too heavy for direction. The rain hammered on, relentless, drowning the world in its fury. At the corner of the street, she stopped. Her breath came in ragged bursts, each one forming a cloud that vanished instantly in the storm. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone of a wall, her eyes closing. In that moment, she understood something cruel. The greatest betrayal was not from strangers, but from the ones you loved enough to give your life for. Lightning split the sky, illuminating her face in stark white. Her tears glittered in the flash, and her eyes held no accusation, only a depthless sorrow, a surrender to a night that had stripped her of everything. She pushed away from the wall and walked on, her figure small against the downpour. Each step echoed with loneliness. The storm swallowed her whole, her shadow dissolving into the darkness, as though she had never been there at all. And yet, deep in her pocket, the necklace pulsed with memory, as if it carried a promise she had not yet spoken. The steam from the kitchen curled into the night like breath from an unseen giant. Pots clattered, metal against stone, the rhythm of survival played out in a cramped back alley of the city. The smell of frying onions and smoked fish filled the air, strong enough to sting the eyes, but warm enough to draw strangers in from the rain-soaked streets. Abeni stood at the threshold, her shawl still damp, her shoes heavy with mud. The storm from the night before clung to her bones, but here, in the glow of firelight, something stirred. She had followed her friend's promise of shelter to this place, not knowing it would lead her into a world both humbler and richer than the one she had left behind. Inside, the small eatery was alive in its own way. The tables were mismatched, their edges chipped. The walls bore stains of smoke and oil. Yet laughter rose from the few diners, hearty and unguarded, blending with the hiss of boiling broth. Behind the counter stood Naya, her arms bare, her skin glistening with sweat, as she stirred a pot larger than her own frame. Her voice cut through the noise, sharp but kind. "You're late, but hungry, I see." She motioned for Abeni to come closer. The warmth hit her at once. It wasn't just the heat of fire, but the pulse of human life, unpretentious and steady. Her hands, so used to fine fabrics and polished wood, found themselves reaching for a stack of chipped bowls. She hesitated, her pride wrestling with the memory of being cast out. But Nia's eyes left no space for hesitation. "Start with these. Dishes don't clean themselves." So she did. At first her movements were clumsy, her fingers raw from scrubbing against old soap. The water was greasy, lukewarm, carrying the smell of meals long finished. Yet as she worked, she found the rhythm of it, her body remembering that dignity did not live only in polished halls. Each bowl she stacked felt like a step back into her own skin. The hours passed in this rhythm until Naya called out, "Taste this. Something's off." Abeni wiped her hands, her chest rising with nerves. She approached the pot, the steam wrapping around her face, the broth bubbling angrily, as if aware of its own failure. She dipped the wooden spoon, tasted. Salt clung sharp on her tongue, but the soul was missing. She remembered nights when she had boiled bones until dawn, stretching scraps into meals that carried warmth, even in hunger. Slowly, she reached for the spices on the shelf, a pinch of dried pepper, a touch of ginger, a squeeze of lemon. She stirred, the motion deliberate, as if writing her name again for the first time. The air shifted. The broth released a fragrance that was not merely food but memory, the smell of hearth and hands, of sacrifice turned into comfort. Diners who had grown restless turned their heads. The first bowl was ladled out, steam rising like incense. A man in worn clothes took a spoonful, then another, then raised his voice above the clamor. This tastes like home." The words fell heavy into the room. Heads nodded. Another diner clapped, a woman wiping her mouth with the back of her hand as though overcome. A murmur spread. The applause followed, awkward at first, then swelling into a rhythm that filled the little space with something more powerful than music. Nia froze, ladle in hand, her eyes on Abeni. "Where did you learn that?" Abeni lowered her gaze, her throat tight. "From hunger," she whispered, though only she could hear it. For the first time since leaving her son's house, she felt her chest expand with something other than grief. She had been cast aside as nothing, but here, in this smoky corner of the city, she was not invisible. Her hands, her memory, her love, they still mattered. Nia wiped her brow, then smiled in a way that carried both astonishment and resolve. "Tomorrow, you're not just washing dishes. You belong at the stove." The fire crackled louder, as though agreeing. Abeni's eyes blurred, but she did not fight it. Tears slid down her cheeks, catching the glow of the flames. She tried to hide them, but the sound of clapping drowned her silence. She bowed her head, her palms trembling as she accepted the applause that washed over her like a tide. In that moment she understood. She was not finished. The world had turned its back. Her son had slammed the door, but her story had not ended in the rain. It was beginning again, here, where fire met broth, where strangers tasted not just food but the persistence of a woman who refused to vanish. Yet even as the night warmed her, the necklace in her pocket pressed cold against her thigh. Its beads reminded her of what had been lost and what still awaited. Tomorrow would bring new trials. But tonight, in the flickering light of a humble kitchen, she allowed herself to believe that ashes could carry sparks. And when the last diner left and silence settled over the room, Abeni sat on a wooden stool, her hands folded tight, her tears drying into a fragile smile. The echo of the applause lingered in her ears, louder than the storm outside. For the first time in too long, she let herself whisper to the empty room, "Maybe I can start again." The champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor, but Kwame hardly noticed. Music thundered from the speakers. Lights spun in dizzying colors. Laughter burst around him like firecrackers. He sat in the middle of the chaos, a half-empty bottle at his elbow, his head heavy from drink and the weight of a life that had become too golden, too loud. Zuri leaned against him, her perfume thick as smoke, her bracelets chiming when she raised another toast. Guests cheered, their voices swelling in the echoing hall of their rented villa. He forced a smile, but his chest felt hollow. The world praised him, envied him, called him lucky. Yet beneath the noise, he heard another sound, a faint beep from his phone, a notification buried in the music. It flashed for a second. Change of access. Banking authorization updated. His eyes lingered, his stomach clenched. But before the thought could settle, Zuri's hand snatched the phone from his lap, her laugh cutting through his doubt. "Ignore it, love. These banks only know how to nag." She kissed him, lips tasting of wine. The crowd roared, and he let the sound swallow the warning. Days melted into nights of excess. Stores welcomed them with red carpets, clerks carrying boxes of clothes, shoes, bags. Cars arrived at the gate, delivered in gleaming paint and leather. Zuri's laughter was everywhere, filling each space like a crown no one dared remove. Kwame followed, dazed, telling himself it was love. Yet he noticed things he wished he hadn't. The way her eyes darted to receipts before she kissed him. The way she pressed his hand to sign papers without reading them. The way strangers' names flickered on her phone. One afternoon, she handed him a folder. Inside lay neat stacks of documents, pages crisp, stamps heavy with authority. All these contracts, the vendors, the planners, it's endless. She sighed dramatically, slipping into his lap. Let me handle it all. Just sign here, and I'll take care of everything. You should be free to enjoy us. Her fingers traced his jaw, her eyes shining with practiced tenderness. He hesitated. The memory of his mother's face rose unbidden, her lips trembling in warning. His hand gripped the pen, but sweat broke across his palms. Zuri tilted her head, her earrings catching the sun like daggers. Don't you trust me? The words slithered between them, a challenge he wasn't ready to face. The pen scratched across the page, his name forever tied to something he hadn't read. That night, alone in the bedroom, he checked his email again. The subject lines blurred with jargon. Account modification confirmed. Authorization transferred. His chest tightened. He clicked one, eyes skimming the numbers, but his hand trembled too much to finish. A laugh rang from the balcony, Zuri's voice sweet and sharp. He shut the laptop and shoved it away, telling himself tomorrow would be better. But tomorrow brought a darker seed. He had risen early, still restless, and gone out for air. The city was quieter at dawn, the streets smelling of dust and wet stone. At the corner cafe, he froze. Through the glass, he saw her. Zuri, wrapped in a silk scarf, her hand brushing the arm of a man in a dark suit. They leaned close, their voices muffled but urgent. Kwame's pulse hammered as he moved closer, his ear straining through the glass. He caught fragments. Once it's all transferred, he won't see it coming. The man's name slipped from her lips like an afterthought. Omari. Kwame stumbled back, his throat dry, his heart tearing between denial and fury. The scene burned into him, her hand lingering on Omari's sleeve, her smile soft but sharp. He told himself it was business, that he misunderstood. He told himself love demanded trust, but the seed had been planted, and every laugh, every kiss, every glance from her eyes now carried poison. He returned home, his body stiff, his mind storming. She greeted him with open arms, her perfume wrapping around him. He kissed her forehead, forcing the smile, but inside he was watching, listening, waiting. That evening another email came. His eyes scanned the words, the warning bright and bold. Notice, your primary access has been adjusted. Please confirm if this activity was expected. His finger hovered over the button. Confirm. Deny. His chest ached, his breath shallow. The shadows in the room thickened, the hum of the refrigerator louder than the music playing faintly in the background. Zuri's laugh echoed from the garden, floating through the window like a siren's song. He closed the message. He marked it read. His hand shook as he placed the phone face down, the screen going black. He sat there, his reflection caught in the glass of the darkened screen. A man split in two. The son who had ignored his mother's warning, and the husband who feared the truth. Outside, the night deepened. Omari's name whispered again in his memory, wrapped in Zuri's voice. The seed grew roots, spreading in the silence of his chest. He poured himself another drink, though the taste turned bitter. His eyes fixed on the unopened letters piling near the door, on the folder Zuri had tossed aside, on the shadows stretching across the marble floor. And for the first time, He did not feel like a man in love. He felt like a man waiting for something to break. His jaw clenched, his eyes stung. The pen he had signed with still lay on the table, its ink drying into permanence. He touched it, then let it fall, the clatter sharp as a warning bell. But no one heard, and as the night dragged on, Kwame sat alone in his gilded cage, staring at the email he had chosen not to read, his heart heavy with a fear he could not name. The room was silent, save for the faint buzz of his phone, another notification arriving unseen. The veil floated like a ghost above the aisle lights, a shimmer of white suspended in the breath of the hall. Strings swelled. The crowd rose as one body. Cameras hunted for faces, for tears, for proof that love could blind the brightest room. Zuri stepped forward, silk sliding like water over marble, jeweled bouquet trembling in her hands, as if the flowers themselves were alive. Kwame waited at the altar under an arch of pale roses and gold leaves, a man made taller by hope. The scent of perfume and cut stems mingled, sweet and metallic, like celebration and blood. Her fingers slipped into his, ice cold and steady. He squeezed them, and the tremor that ran through him surprised him. It's only nerves, he told himself, only joy too big to carry without shaking. The officiant's voice rolled over them in a practiced wave, words about promise, patience, endurance, words he had said to himself in smaller rooms, to a younger version of himself when life was not yet gilded. Now the words seemed to bounce off the gold. Applause broke like surf after the vows, after the ring circled her finger and claimed its place among diamonds. A kiss. The room leaned in. Flash. The applause swelled into a roar that trailed them down the aisle, through a tunnel of hands and confetti. He could not stop smiling. He didn't want to. Every sacrifice, every late night, every small hunger had led here. Music spun around them. A drum line punched bright holes in the air. They were swallowed by the party. Tables glowed under candlelight. A chandelier breathed over the dance floor. The band slid from classic into feverish. Waiters moved like synchronized shadows, carrying trays of champagne that chimed like ice when glasses brushed. Zuri's laugh cut cleanly through everything. A bell the room recognized and obeyed. She pulled him into a first dance as the lights dimmed and the world narrowed to a circle of polished floor. Her cheek pressed to his. Her perfume bloomed, sweet and hot, and for a moment his chest loosened. He let himself be led. People blurred at the edges. A childhood teacher dabbed at her eyes. A former boss clapped too hard. A cousin filmed from a bad angle. He caught flashes of mouths shaping blessings, of hands over hearts. The song ended. Another began. The crowd surged to take their turn. He lost track of faces. He lost track of time. When he turned to find her again, she was at a table of friends, head bent, her lips moving in quick half-smiles he couldn't read. He told himself to breathe. He told himself to stop searching every gesture for a shadow. The morning's doubt from the cafe window uncurled in his mind like smoke. He swatted it away. He would not bring that into this room. Not tonight. Toasts began. The best man told a story about a car with no brakes and a hill that taught them fear. Laughter spilled. A bridesmaid lifted her glass and spoke of destiny. Zuri looked luminous, each compliment pouring over her like oil, leaving her gleam untouched and larger. Kwame's phone buzzed against his thigh. He ignored it. A waiter offered him fresh champagne, and he took it too fast, bubbles scraping against his throat. The glass sweated in his palm. He set it down, and it left a wet ring, like a new moon. He caught Zuri's eye across the table. Her smile was quick and good. She tilted her head a fraction. Come. He went. They love us, she murmured, voice barely a breath. He nodded. She reached into the clutch at her elbow for her phone. Stand with me near the fountain. I want the footage to look perfect. She said it laughing, but her eyes were already tracking the camera in the hands of an influencer friend, circling the room. He slipped an arm around her waist, and together they turned into the light. The fountain was ridiculous. Marble children poured water into marble basins while living roses curled in glass cylinders around them. The water's spray made soft hiss laughter that tangled with the band's horn line. She pressed her glass into his hand and said, 1 second, and left him by the fountain to greet an elderly donor whose presence bought headlines. He watched her move away, watched the subtle shift in her shoulders as she turned, the way her smile adjusted when the donor leaned in. It had the precision of a key fitting a lock. His phone throbbed again. A different vibration, short, insistent. He fished it out, thumbed the screen. A new message banner flashed and vanished. Another. The settings mirrored notifications across devices. He and Zuri had used a temporary shared login to streamline vendor schedules for the week. It had seemed harmless, efficient. The phone pulsed once more, a small, urgent heartbeat against his skin. He stepped back from the fountain's light into the shadow of a column and pulled the notification shade down. A small icon glowed, an audio file, attached to a chat he did not recognize. The contact name was simple, discreet. O. The preview text read, "Hold your breath." He didn't move. The band crashed into a new chorus. A cheer rose. He swiped without thinking, and the file opened. At first he heard only the room, the same horns he was hearing live, the same clink, the same murmur. Then her voice, close to the mic, laughter folded into something that sounded like relief. "After tonight," she said, warm, quick, confidential. "It's all ours. Ours, not his and hers. Hers and—" His finger slipped. The recording ended. He stood there with the sound of water in his ears and a cold spreading from his stomach outward, a frost that crept up into his chest. He stared at the screen as if looking harder could make the words different. It could not. Ours. He replayed the last 2 seconds, the economy of it, how practiced it sounded, how at home she was in the shape of that sentence. A clap landed on his back. He flinched. "Brother, you must eat," someone laughed, pushing a plate of tiny pastries toward him. He smiled, or something like it. The pastries smelled of butter and almonds. He could not imagine swallowing. He muttered thanks and slid sideways, nodding at another guest, the recording a live wire in his hand. He pressed the phone to his palm hard enough to feel the bones shift in protest. Zuri reappeared and hooked her arm through his. Her skin was warm. Her smile was perfect. "You disappeared," she said gently. "Come cut the cake with me." He studied her face. He searched for a seam. She blinked. Sweet concern lifted at the edges. "Are you all right?" He found his voice and made it work. "Fine, just lightheaded." She touched his jaw. "Then sugar will fix it," she whispered, leading him forward. The cake was 5 tiers of white and gold, each layer circled with fresh flowers. The knife flashed. Hands guided theirs together. Cameras begged them to pause, to look up. He looked up, and his eyes skated past lenses to faces he'd known since he was small. He thought of his mother's hands mending his school collar. He thought of the email subject lines he had marked red. He thought of the man in the dark suit at dawn and a silk scarf brushing his sleeve. They cut. Frosting clung to the blade like snow. Zuri smeared a little on his nose to general delight. He reached for her and dabbed a bit on her cheek to a roar of approval. She licked the sugar from her lip and made a face of comic surprise, and the crowd loved them more. He laughed too long, too hard. It felt safer than silence. He excused himself with the pretense of greeting an uncle and walked away from the light. He moved along the edge of the room, where candles threw soft shadows that pooled and released. He sat at a table that no one claimed and listened to the fountain again, because the sound was steady, indifferent. His phone waited in his hand like a confession. Another message arrived. Same chat, same small icon. He tapped with less hesitation than before. Voices spilled out, hers and a man's, low and close, their words threaded by the room's music like beads on a wire. The man was careful. She was careful too, but there was a laugh in her that she never used with him. Once the registries reflect the change, it moves quickly, the man murmured. By morning at the latest. She hushed him. Don't be dramatic. Smile. We're being filmed. Then softer, almost cooing. Tomorrow I send what you asked. After tonight, everything is in place. By morning at the latest. The words clicked into some mechanism inside him and set it spinning. Authorization. Transfer. He saw in his mind the emails he had flicked away, the forms he'd signed with her weight warm across his knees. He saw himself as if from above, a man in a beautiful suit, eating cake while someone moved the floor under his feet. He ended the audio quickly when a child spun near his chair and nearly toppled a candle. He steadied the glass with his free hand and the child fled laughing. He sat with the flame breathing against his knuckles and the truth touching every inch of his skin. A server paused. Sir? He blinked. Water, please. The server nodded and vanished like a thought he didn't want to lose. Zuri's phone chimed across the room, faint but unmistakable to him now. As specific as a heartbeat you learn by sleeping next to it. She checked the screen in a movement so small it would read as a breath to anyone else. A thin smile passed over her mouth. She stepped into a new cluster of guests and let someone adjust her train. She threw her head back at a joke she didn't hear. She owned the room. He sat and swallowed a mouthful of water that tasted like a metal coin. Panic rose, then fell, leaving a clean ache. He stood. He found her again. When she turned, he thought he saw the mask shimmer, the paint of affection that had been brushed on with such care. But it held. She touched his wrist. Dance? They stepped into the lights once more. The band slid into something darker, slower. He placed his hand at the small of her back and felt the heat of her. He could ask her now. He could say the man's name. He could hold up the phone. He saw the scene unfurling in public. The breakage, the mouths opening, the humiliation. Her eyes lifted to his, guileless and bright. He swallowed his question and let the drum line count his breath. He moved with her through the measures like a man walking across a river on stones that vanished when he reached for the next. Her lips brushed his ear. A lover's whisper meant only for him. You're quiet. He made a sound that he hoped could be mistaken for joy. She laughed softly. I'll let you rest after this, my prince. You look like you haven't slept. He thought of the morning sun crawling across their bedroom floor. He thought of a door opening onto a room stripped of them. He took a breath that shuddered and steadied himself with his own hand at her spine. Later, he found the quietest stretch of balcony he could, a slice of night where the city breathed and the party's pulse dulled. Distant traffic rose and fell, A single star managed to punch through the city's light. He held the phone and played the line again. After tonight, it's all ours. He looked back at the hall. Through glass, he saw himself reflecting in others, 1,000 versions of a groom. Somewhere inside, someone cheered. Somewhere, a cork popped. Somewhere, the fountain laughed. He could walk inside and break his own life with a question. He could walk inside and lay the recording on the table where the cake had been. He could say her name like a verdict. He pressed the phone against the cold rail until his fingers hurt. He said nothing. He thought of his mother's eyes in the hallway weeks ago, the way sorrow had steadied her mouth. He thought of how this night would live inside her if he made it an explosion. He thought of the law, the banks, the possibility that he was wrong and would never be forgiven. He thought of tenderness that had felt true on ordinary mornings when they had been just two bodies reaching for coffee and light. He slid the phone into his pocket. He walked back inside. He found Zuri at the edge of the dance floor, chatting with a woman whose dress glittered like a river of stars. He kissed his wife's temple. She surprised him with a small, genuine smile that nearly undid him. "Let's go early," she said, voice ripe with suggestion, fingers tracing the inside of his wrist. "Leave them to dance without us." He nodded. He felt himself promising a future with a movement of his head. He escorted her down the corridor lined with photographs of strangers, kissing under impossible flowers. The sound of the party thinned into a hum. At the suite door, she lifted her face and kissed him lightly, then turned to fuss with the lock, laughing when the card didn't read. He stepped behind her, placed his hands gently on her shoulders, the gesture of a husband steadying a moment. He smelled roses. He smelled the metallic nearness of the fountain. Far now, but haunting. The door clicked. She slipped inside, curling toward the mirror. He stood in the doorway for a heartbeat longer, feeling the hinge of his life shift under his weight. He told himself he would sleep. He told himself he would wake before the sun, before she did. He would walk down to the office in the corner of the suite, open the laptop, and look full at what he had refused to see for weeks. He would pull the documents. He would call the bank. He would say her name and listen. Morning would be a clean blade. Tonight he would keep the peace intact for one last hour. He closed the door softly behind him. He leaned his forehead to the wood until the cool seeped into his skin. He whispered the single lie he needed to survive the dark. Tomorrow. The sheets were cold when he reached across the bed. Her perfume still lingered, faint but sharp, a ghost of roses and smoke. The clock on the wall blinked 7:02. Kwame sat up fast, his chest tightening as if the morning air itself had betrayed him. The room was too quiet. No sound of running water, no heels clicking across the polished floor, no voice humming under her breath, only silence, deep and unbroken, like a verdict already passed. His phone vibrated on the nightstand. The screen lit up with words that froze the blood in his veins. Notice. Account frozen. Immediate action required. He swiped with hands that shook, his breath shallow. Lines of text scrolled. Authorization transfer confirmed. Funds locked pending new access. Attached was another file, this one colder, heavier. A property deed stamped and signed. The house. Their house. His house. Transferred yesterday. The phone slipped from his fingers and hit the marble floor with a crack that echoed louder than it should. He lurched to his feet, his heart pounding against his ribs. The wardrobe door swung open under his hand, its hinges groaning. Empty. Her dresses, her shoes, her silk scarves, gone. The vanity drawers, emptied. The jewelry box, only dust. The only thing left was a note scrawled in her handwriting on hotel stationery. "Goodbye, fool." The word burned him more than the rain outside. He stumbled to the balcony, the curtains whipping against his shoulders. The city below moved as it always had. Buses, vendors, a boy chasing a ball. But his world had stopped. He ran his fingers through his hair and choked on a sound that was neither cry nor laugh. Grabbing his keys, he rushed downstairs, each step a thunderclap in the hollow villa. The front door banged against the wall as he stormed out into the street. Rain splattered his face, soaking his shirt within moments, plastering it to his skin. He ran, the asphalt slick under his feet, his lungs burning as though he had swallowed fire. His car was gone. Of course it was gone. He flagged a cab with frantic hands, his voice breaking when he barked his address. The driver looked at him once, then drove in silence. When they stopped, Kwame was already out before the wheels quit rolling. He stumbled to the gate of his family home, the house his mother had built piece by piece out of sacrifice. He punched the code into the keypad. Red. Wrong. He tried again. Again. A buzz. A denial. His palm slammed against the metal, the cold jarring through his bones. He looked up at the windows. Lights glowed warmly inside, silhouettes moving past curtains. He was outside in the rain, watching strangers live his life. He shouted, the sound torn out of him raw. No one answered. The lock had been changed. The keys in his pocket felt like dead metal now, relics of a man already erased. He backed away, step by step, his chest heaving. His suitcase, half-zipped, sat on the curb where the cabbie had dropped it, its leather already soaking, darkening with rain. He sank beside it, his head in his hands. The world moved around him, indifferent. Cars hissed past, throwing spray. A dog barked and kept barking. He stayed where he was, drowning in air. The phone buzzed again in his pocket. He pulled it out, the screen a blur through rain and tears. A final message, from her, from Zuri. Told you, love doesn't need contracts, but money does. Thank you for everything. A laughing emoji sealed it. He dropped the phone. It clattered against the wet concrete, the light still glowing until the water dimmed it. He lifted his face to the rain, letting it mix with the heat of his grief. His throat ached with words he couldn't shape. He saw his mother's face again in memory, her eyes dark with warning, her voice trembling with love. He had silenced her. He had called her wrong. Now he sat on the street outside his own house, stripped of wealth, of dignity, of name. He had nothing but the soaked clothes on his back and the storm for company. The neighbors walked by quickly, some staring, some pretending not to see. To them he was no longer a man of power, no longer the golden groom. He was just another shadow in the rain, a reminder that pride breaks easier than glass. The necklace in his mother's pocket came back to him like a vision, shining in the dark of her hand. She had given him every warning. He had refused every one. And now he was here, alone, watching the lights of his house burn without him. He stayed there until the rain softened to drizzle, until the night bled into morning. His suitcase sagged with water, useless. His phone lay cracked. He lifted both hands to his face and pressed hard, as if he could squeeze himself back into the man he had been. But the man was gone. He had been taken with the money, the house, the trust. What remained was only a husk. Kwame stood finally, weak in the knees. His shadow stretched across the wet street, long and broken. He looked once more at the house, its windows golden, warm, unreachable. Then he turned away. He dragged the suitcase behind him. the wheels stuttering against the curb, his footsteps heavy and slow. The rain began again, soft, steady, unrelenting. He did not know where he was going. He only knew he had nowhere left to return to, and when he glanced up once more, just for breath, the lights blurred with water until they looked like stars falling, one by one, leaving him with nothing but the cold. The smell of roasted meat and spiced rice struck him before the sight did. Kwame's stomach clenched so hard it hurt. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, not more than scraps begged from a stranger's kindness. Now he stood at the edge of a crowded market, the noise of bargaining and laughter pressing in from every side, the scent of food cutting into his hunger like knives. He swayed on his feet, his body weak, his mind a fog of shame and craving. People brushed past carrying baskets, their arms filled with fruit and bread. He looked like a ghost among the living, clothes damp from rain, hair unkempt, eyes hollow. He followed the smell as if dragged by a rope, each step heavier than the last. Then he saw her, behind a wooden counter, ladling steaming rice into bowls, stood his mother. Abeni's hair was pulled back, her hands quick and sure as she served customers. The lines on her face were deeper, carved by nights of toil, but her eyes held the same steady fire. She wore a plain apron stained from the day's labor, yet to Kwame she looked brighter than the golden lights of his wedding. She laughed at a customer's joke, and the sound sliced through him. He hadn't heard it in years without bitterness. He froze, his body trembling. Shame tightened his throat. He had thrown her out of his house. He had called her a liar. He had chosen another woman's arms over hers. And now he stood in rags before her, hollow and broken. A boy shouted, "2 more bowls." And Abeni turned, her ladle moving, her body alive with purpose. She didn't see him at first. The crowd pressed between them. He stepped forward, dizzy, his chest pounding. The next moment his knees gave way, and he fell hard on the muddy ground. Bowls rattled, voices gasped. He stayed down, unable to rise, his palms sinking into the wet dirt. "Mama." The word broke from him, raw, unshaped, torn out of the deepest place in his chest. He lifted his head, his face streaked with tears and dust. "Mama, I'm sorry." His voice cracked, louder this time, reaching over the crowd. Silence spread like fire through the market. Conversations faltered, coins stilled, feet stopped moving, eyes turned. A grown man, once dressed in power, now knelt in the dirt before an old woman with an apron. Children clutched their mothers, men shifted uncomfortably, women pressed their lips tight. No one laughed, no one jeered. They only stared. Abeni's hand froze mid-motion. The ladle dripped broth back into the pot. Her eyes widened, her chest rising. She stepped out from behind the counter, slow, careful, as though afraid he would vanish if she moved too quickly. Her sandals slapped the wet ground, the sound sharp in the silence. She stopped in front of him. Kwame bowed his head until it touched the mud. His shoulders shook with sobs. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive me for everything." The market held its breath. Abeni looked down at her son, her face unreadable. The necklace in her pocket pressed against her leg, its beads remembering every sacrifice. Her hands trembled, not from anger, but from the storm inside her chest. She could have turned away. She could have left him to the dirt as he had left her to the rain. But love, old and stubborn, rose above pride. She set the ladle aside. With steady hands, she reached down, not to lift him, but to place a bowl of rice in front of him. The steam curled into his face, carrying the smell of ginger and garlic. He lifted his eyes, confused, broken. She did not speak. She only pushed the bowl closer. Then, when he could no longer hold himself up, she bent and wrapped her arms around him. The crowd shifted, murmurs swelling, but no one dared disturb the moment. Some turned away, tears burning in their own eyes. Others watched as though witnessing something holy. In the embrace, words became unnecessary. Forgiveness was not spoken. It was given in silence, in arms that refused to let go. Kwame clung to her, his tears soaking her shoulder. He felt smaller than he had since childhood, yet safer than he had in years. She kissed his hair, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "Tomorrow, you come into the kitchen with me." The words carried more weight than any sentence of judgment. They were not only forgiveness, but a demand to rise, to learn, to rebuild. The market exhaled as if waking from a dream. People returned to their business, but slower, quieter, carrying the echo of what they had seen. Mothers touched their children's shoulders. Fathers looked away, hiding emotion. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground glistening. Kwame lifted the spoon with shaking hands. The food burned his tongue, but he ate as if it were salvation. The flavors flooded him with memory. Nights of her cooking when they had nothing. Mornings when her hands pressed his clothes for school. Every bite was a piece of her love returned to him, undeserved yet freely given. When he finished, he set the bowl down and looked at her. She brushed the mud from his cheek, her eyes wet but fierce. Around them, life continued. But for him, for her, the world had narrowed to this moment. A son on his knees, a mother lifting him not with words but with mercy. And as the evening sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the market, Kwame felt something shift inside him. The weight of shame did not vanish, but it became something else, a seed of resolve. He had lost everything, but here in the mud, in the arms of his mother, he had found the only thing worth starting over for. The fire hissed as oil kissed the pan, the sound sharp as applause. Kwame's hands trembled as he gripped the spatula, his fingers clumsy, his movements uncertain. The knife scars on the cutting board bore witness to his attempts. Onions chopped too thick, tomatoes smashed instead of sliced. The kitchen smelled of garlic and pepper, rich and earthy, yet beneath it lingered the smoke of mistakes. Sweat rolled down his temples. The heat of the stove pressed against his chest like judgment. He glanced sideways. Abeni stood nearby, her hands steady on the ladle, her eyes sharp but soft, guiding without words. The market stall had grown. Customers lined up outside, voices calling, laughter rising, coins clinking. The name painted above the doorway, Mama Abeni's kitchen, glowed with pride he didn't feel he deserved. A bowl clattered against the counter. "You missed the salt," Abeni said quietly, tasting the broth with the tip of her spoon. Again. Kwame reached for the shaker, his face burning, but she stopped his hand. "No, taste first." He did. The blandness bit his tongue, and shame colored his face. He wanted to throw the pot out, to give up, to let the walls close in, but her eyes held him in place. "Taste teaches better than scolding," she murmured. "Try again." He did. Slowly, carefully, he balanced the flavors, learning the rhythm of fire and spice. Outside, the crowd clapped when the next bowls went out. For the first time in weeks, someone called his name, not with scorn, but with gratitude. Evenings grew heavier with customers. The once small stall expanded, tables spilling into the street, lanterns glowing in the dusk. The smell of roasted fish and spiced stew became a beacon that pulled strangers from blocks away. Each night, Kwame stood beside his mother, knife in hand, sweat dripping into his collar, learning how to measure without a scale, how to listen to the hiss of oil, how to smell when rice was ready. Slowly his hands grew surer. The shame did not vanish, but it bent into discipline. One morning, while cleaning the counter, he found a folded piece of velvet tucked in the drawer. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside lay the necklace, the beads polished and repaired, each one shining again. His chest ached. He looked at his mother, who watched him quietly from across the room. "I thought I lost this," he whispered. She shook her head. "You only forgot its worth." She pressed it into his palm. "Now you return it, not to me, but to what you are becoming." He swallowed hard, fighting tears. "Mama, I don't deserve—" She raised her hand, silencing him. "Deserve is not the question. What you do next is." Her words settled into him like seeds in fertile ground. Days became months. The stall transformed into a restaurant. The wooden sign was replaced with carved letters, Mama Abeni's kitchen. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, the tables sturdy and new. Customers filled every seat, not only for the food but for the story. A story whispered from mouth to mouth, of a son who had fallen, of a mother who had lifted him with nothing but food and forgiveness. Journalists came. Photos were taken. People wrote about flavor, but what they tasted was redemption simmering in broth. On the night of the grand reopening, lanterns swung above the doorway, throwing golden circles of light onto the street. The crowd stretched far, neighbors and strangers alike pressing forward to see. Inside, the kitchen pulsed with life. Kwame moved among the stoves, his sleeves rolled, his arms strong. He no longer flinched when knives hit boards. He no longer shook when flames leapt. His face was set, but there was peace in his movements. When the doors opened, cheers rose like thunder. Plates clattered, glasses clinked. Musicians played outside, their drums echoing into the night. At the center of it all, Abeni and Kwame stood side by side. She looked at him, her eyes shining not with pride alone, but with something deeper. Trust returned. As the night wore on, a final gesture remained. Kwame reached into his pocket and drew out the necklace, now strung on a chain of silver. The crowd hushed as he placed it around his mother's neck. His voice was low, but every ear caught it. "You gave everything for me once. Tonight, I give back what I stole. Not gold, not wealth, but the truth that your love is my only inheritance." Abeni's eyes closed, tears slipping down her cheeks. She touched the necklace gently, her fingers trembling. The room erupted with applause, louder than any he had known in his years of wealth. But this time it did not feel hollow. It felt earned. The cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, children clapped. Yet in the center there was only a mother and a son, their hands joined across a counter that smelled of soup and rice and forgiveness. At the far end of the hall, someone unveiled a framed photograph. It was simple. Abeni and Kwame in the kitchen, flour dusting their hands, laughter caught mid-breath. Beneath it hung a plaque. True wealth is love and character. The restaurant filled with voices, but in that moment, silence roared in Kwame's heart. He had been stripped of everything, money, house, pride. And yet, standing here beside his mother, beneath the glow of lanterns, he felt richer than ever before. Outside, the city buzzed on. The lights glimmered on wet pavement. A passing wind carried the smell of their food across streets, drawing more footsteps toward the door. The night was alive, but the kitchen burned brighter. Kwame looked around, his chest rising with something new, something solid. He was no longer the man who had fallen. He was the man who had begun again. And as the applause faded into laughter, as the bowls clattered and spoons stirred, he felt the weight of tomorrow pressing forward, not as a threat, but as a promise. Sometimes the most powerful journeys do not take us across oceans or mountains, but inward, into the fragile chambers of the human heart. There, in the hidden spaces where pride collides with pain, and where failure meets forgiveness, the truest battles are fought. What seemed like loss becomes the soil from which renewal grows. What was once broken becomes the vessel through which compassion flows. The story reminds us that wealth is not counted in coins or possessions, but in the strength of relationships, the courage to admit mistakes, and the grace to begin again when everything else has been stripped away. Life will always find ways to humble us. One moment, we stand on shining floors, beneath chandeliers, believing the world is ours. The next, we may find ourselves outside in the rain, alone, with nothing left but the echo of choices we wish we could undo. Yet even in that desolation, there can be a hand reaching through the storm, a reminder that dignity is never entirely lost if love still survives. Forgiveness, too, is not weakness, but a force that rebuilds what pride has destroyed. To forgive is to hold open the door for tomorrow. To accept forgiveness is to walk through it with trembling steps, ready to change. There is beauty in simplicity, shared meals, warm laughter, honest work. It is in these small acts that resilience shows itself, teaching us that fulfillment is not born in luxury, but in meaning. To create something honest with one's own hands, to serve others, to be seen and accepted despite flaws, these are riches no misfortune can steal. The real inheritance we leave behind is not property or jewels, but the stories told of how we loved, how we rose after falling, and how we chose kindness when bitterness beckoned. Every person carries a necklace of invisible beads, each one strung with sacrifice, regret, or redemption. Some beads are dull with sorrow, others shine with memory. Together, they form the chain of our lives, fragile yet unbroken. What matters is not how pristine they appear, but how deeply we value what they symbolize. The lessons learned, the pain endured, the love that survived despite it all. Perhaps this story has stirred something inside you, a memory of a time you turned away, or a moment you were held when you didn't deserve it. Perhaps it has reminded you of the silent strength of those who lifted you when you had no strength of your own. Or perhaps it whispers only this simple truth, that no matter how far we fall, it is never too late to begin again with humility, courage, and love. Thank you for listening, for walking through this journey with open heart and open mind. If these words have touched you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. And if you wish to continue exploring stories of resilience, hope, and the unshakable dignity of the human spirit, please follow and subscribe. Together, let us keep alive the stories that remind us of who we are and who we still have the power to become.